All right, we're back with the Digital Healthcare Podcast. Today I'm joined by Scott Hampel, the president of MedeAnalytics. Scott, thanks so much for joining. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
All right, so MedeAnalytics, we're going to get into that, but I have a really basic question that I'm excited for you to answer because I've asked myself this many times over. Why is analytics so difficult in healthcare?
Yeah, that's a big one, right? I think the simple answer is because healthcare is so complicated, right? But the more detailed answer is probably a bit more nuanced. So, first, I think there's 3.6 trillion of annual spend in the U.S., and 1 trillion of that is estimated to be waste per CMS research. So, with that kind of numbers, there's almost a limitless amount of use cases for analytics that could be studied. So there's one, area of complexity. The second is just, the digitization of healthcare is propelling a massive growth of data. So, I think surveys are saying, or studies are saying 25 zettabytes by 2025. So that's absolutely an ocean of data. And so you got thousands and thousands of different data sources, different grains of data, structured versus unstructured, like physician notes and things. And all of that's got to be painstakingly harmonized into consumable analytics formats of data. And in healthcare, oftentimes that data has to be 100% trusted, because life or death decisions are residing on that clinical data. So, that's the second major area of making analytics difficult for healthcare. And then lastly, I would just say is the consumption itself of the analytics. Data literacy in general, is low in healthcare in terms of understanding, how to make decisions on data, how to action upon data. It's still relatively new in healthcare as it is in other industries. It's not like, EMRs, which have been around for 20 years. Those are systems that people know and understand how to use and navigate. It's not quite the same with analytics. So people struggle to understand how to consume analytics. So, and in healthcare, there's a multitude of consuming constituents, payers, providers, patients, employers, brokers, government agencies. So you throw all that together, all sort of three of those things, and it makes it, pretty difficult landscape for analytics.
Would you say it's true? Because I'm sure throughout the healthcare history, people in the industry or the end users of these analytics applications, they know the questions they'd like answered. Has that been the case from your experiences? Is that the end users know the questions they want to ask? It's just only getting to today where we have the technology and the data aggregation where we can actually start to answer some of those questions?
Well, it's certainly opening up a lot more. I think, we have a whole thing that we do where we talk about the evolution of analytics from reporting to business intelligence tools to, artificial intelligence and sort of the evolution of the sophistication of analytics. And what I would say is the comment that you make is, when people want a report written for them that they will run, either once or run habitually, they know what they're asking for, right? They know, and so they describe, hey, here's the problem I'm looking to tackle. Can you data analyst or IT person create me a report that, does X and Y and Z? But I think that only really scratches the surface on the decisions that could be made with analytics. And so, things became more modernized. You created BI tools like your business objects and your Cognos and things like that. And then things now have evolved into like Tableau and, some of those tools, and they help you with a little bit more visual data discovery. But I think it's more systems like our own, and then there are some competitors where the user can really drive, and they may have had one question at the beginning that they were trying to solve for, but then once they, found that answer, it led them to three more questions, and they started drilling then into, finding answers to that and finding more and more answers. And we're finding that, That drives that kind of enablement of ad hoc analysis and allowing the end users to really navigate and guide their own sort of questioning. That drives a lot more value and a lot more adoption of analytics.
Yeah, and I imagine once you open Pandora's box, the sky's the limit is
Yeah,
probably what you realize.
then they always want more. Yep.
Yes.
They always want more, and they want it, in a newer way, and with cooler data science and what have you. So exactly.
That's what makes being an IT professional fun.
Yeah, yeah.
So to talk about the company, then, what does the product do, and what were the drivers behind the company originating?
Okay. Um, well, thank you for asking. I mean, MedeAnalytics. So we've actually been around 25 years. It started off as a company called MediFinance, and our original heritage was around revenue cycle management analytics for providers. And the company grew that way for about 10, 15 years. About 10 years ago, we expanded into the payer side of things. And we started, you know, a few years ago, we started looking at the market trends for fee for value, the convergence of clinical, financial, and operational data, how more and more providers wanted access to claims, data, how more and more payers wanted access to provider and clinical data, all in the name of evolution and adoption of fee for value. And we started looking at our platform and going, gosh, with all these payer and provider customers, we could provide an end-to-end platform that would solve for a lot of challenges that are going on in healthcare. Right now there are 415 different analytics vendors, if you go to HIMSS, that are offering analytics solutions. It's one of the most fragmented software vendor landscapes in all industries. And all of those point solutions, being stitched together today, are driving 20 billion in spend annually by healthcare organizations on consulting and SI firms, on their own IT staffs to produce data analytics. And we looked at our own portfolio and breadth of analytics in our platform and went, we could really reduce a lot of that spend, and we could provide one universal platform for payer and provider analytics where things reside on common data definitions, like average length of stay is the same in your revenue cycle analytics products as it is in your population health analytics products, for example. But have one sort of common data library and then serve up analytics, healthcare analytics applications on top of it, and do that across payer and provider sort of uh, spectrum and processes. And so we've evolved to that. And so today, our aspiration is to be the enterprise analytics platform for healthcare organizations. And we're really focused on payers and providers, but also like integrated delivery networks, public sector, like divisions of Medicaid and things like that use us. A lot of brokers will use us as an extension off of the health plans. And so those are the constituents that we're serving.
Interesting. So if I heard you right, that means the company really originated outside of healthcare and kind of grew into it. Is that true?
No, we were in healthcare. We were
Okay.
on the revenue cycle management side. So our clients were health systems, hospitals, who were submitting claims to
Okay.
payers and trying to figure out how to, improve, reduce their amount of denials and improve their cash flows, those kinds of things.
Gotcha. So what's different or the same? Because basically you've laid out the entire spectrum of healthcare for the most part. What's different or the same between all the different players from an analytics perspective?
Well, with
Easy
400,
question, Scott.
yeah, yeah, thanks for the softball, Brian. Um, with 415 vendors, you don't have a lot of similarity. You have a ton of variation there, right? Um, and you have some that are like the data aggregator companies, right? Like Tibco or Informatica, and they orchestrate pulling data from lots of systems and landing at some place. Same with like the EDW vendors, like your Cloudera and your Teradata and stuff like that. Then you got like people that then apply tools on that data. Maybe it's the data science vendors like SAS. Maybe it's the visualization vendors like Tableau or Click. Then you have point solution vendors who, we do rev cycle analytics only, or we really specialize in pop health, or we do payment integrity, or we do fraud, waste, and abuse, right? And then you have vendors that sit on, that might say, hey, we stitch, a lot of things together, like us. Who go, why are you buying all of these point solutions and all of these point tools and spending 20 billion a year, industry, trying to stitch it all together? Why don't you, there's a better way, right? And that's sort of our proposition. So what I would say is, each of these vendors plays a role in the ecosystem of analytics. Like, you can't have analytics if you don't have, some consolidation of data. You can't have analytics if you don't have, interesting ways that your users can consume the data. And so visualization tools and stuff like that uh, serve a purpose. And so we embed them, for example, in our own. It's not like we create our own visualization tools. We embed them in our own platform. So, each of them is serving a different aspect of an end-to-end experience. I just think that with all that fragmentation, it's driving a lot of unnecessary spend. And sometimes it's also minimizing adoption, because when the users are thinking, when one department comes and says, my analytics tool says X, and the other department comes and says, my analytics tool says Y, but they're arguing about the same thing, what that ends up resulting in is people don't trust their data. And when people don't
Mhm.
trust their data, they don't adopt the analytics, they don't use it meaningfully in decision making, and you don't get the value then. So,
Yeah, probably the other thing is that when it's a moving target, when you try vendor X and then vendor Y and then vendor Z, and it's like at some point you just have to pick one, because if you're
right.
always changing the target, you're never gonna get that adoption that you want.
Right. It's just a carousel of tools. There's a client of ours who he calls it his Toys R Us. How he wants to evolve away from his Toys R Us. So,
Yeah, the question you answered was more interesting than the one I was trying to ask. What I was trying to ask was across payers, providers, government entities, all the different customers you serve. I'm wondering how different their perspectives or their needs are compared to each other. Are they all kind of
gotcha.
underlying? That's an easier question. So hopefully,
uh, yeah, I mean, so certainly there is, just this gradual evolution towards value-based principles, right? The shift from the transactional fee-for-service landscape towards the fee for value landscape. And whether you be payer or provider, the principles of the triple aim in terms of improving quality, reducing cost, and driving patient or member satisfaction, those three principles continue, I think, to serve as a north star for healthcare organizations. And so when you think of these different constituents, we have major commonalities, for example, on our quality and population health analytics. We have built out a payer provider core where claims data and accounts and charges and clinical EMR data is all aggregated on one core sort of data warehouse, so to speak. It's more like a logical data warehouse, but not to get too technical. And and payers and providers both want to consume it. Oftentimes, the payers want to take in the clinical data from their participating providers in ACOs, and they may extend these same analytics tools that they have bought. They may extend them to their provider participating ACOs and let the providers tap into the exact same thing that they're seeing, and that allows them to collaborate better on their ACO contracts, as an example.
hey Scott, when you say ACO, what does that stand
Uh,
for? Just for the listeners.
sorry, accountable care organizations. So
Sure.
providers that are managing populations and often taking greater and greater financial risk in managing those populations, and they
Gotcha.
contract with payers accordingly. Does that clarify, Brian?
Yep. Yep. That
Yep.
helps.
Yep. And so, um, what we're seeing then is that both the payers and the providers are running off the same analytics with our pop health and our quality measure analytics solutions. So there's an absolute area of commonality. um, in addition, like the divisions of Medicaid, they like the same stuff. Oftentimes they like that stuff because they are looking uh, they outsource the administration of their spend to different managed care organizations. So the Medicaid dollars that are flowing through these different divisions of Medicaid, they often then will contract with several managed care organizations to administer those benefits, and they use the analytics then that I'm talking about, so that they can oversee those MCOs and make sure that the MCOs are, producing the kinds of outcomes that they want to see on their Medicaid constituents, and doing it for the right kinds of costs, and the appropriate kinds of costs, that are wisely spending those Medicaid dollars. So, see that commonality there extended into Medicaid. That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense, and it's interesting. Would you say it's more because as you play that back, it sounds like everyone's drive or interests are pretty similar to at the core level or at the high level. Except, I'm guessing they're similar too, in that the difficulty they have is aggregating the data or getting the data in a place to even run analytics on. Would you say that's the case pretty much across the board?
Yeah, everyone's challenged by that. Everyone's challenged by that in healthcare. Is how do you aggregate the data? Health systems are making all sorts of acquisitions, and so just when they've gotten everyone live on their Epic instance, if that's what they have, they buy a different health system and they use Cerner, right? Or they buy a new
Mm-hmm.
one and they use Meditech or Siemens or some other EMR. Over in the payer side, they're buying into providers or they're buying other payers, and so you have a lot of that situation where it's hard to integrate. All these different organizations that are running on different platforms. And then again, it gets back to the original thing that I was talking about, which is just the explosion of data, and data from different sources that's going on in healthcare. So certainly everyone is challenged by how do you bring in the appropriate data? How do you normalize the appropriate data? How do you join it up into a high performing architecture so that, like, when you run an analytics query against it, it doesn't take, 3 minutes to return something meaningful. It's got to come back in 3 seconds so that a user can move on with their sort of thought process on getting their questions answered. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
certainly a
that makes
challenge.
complete sense. So if we'll leverage your consulting experience for a sec, and you can add your Venmo, and we'll send you your hourly rate. So if you're a if you're a company starting, and you have data probably all over the place, spreadsheets, systems across the board, none of it's connected. Where would you recommend starting?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Is
Well,
it a strategic? Are you putting together some sort of strategy or roadmap? That's probably where I imagine most people start.
you got it. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, the first thing I would do before, like, you're, really looking at your different data sources and your technology and stuff, is to just back it up, uh, into first your strategy, right? What are perhaps the top five objectives of your organization? Whether it be improving of certain care disciplines, and improvement of certain revenue metrics on the revenue cycle side, addressing margin pressures through optimization of your cost and supply chain and your utilization and things like that. So you figure out what are the problems that you're trying to solve for, where you don't feel like you have good insight to be able to navigate and improve your organization's performance. Then once you've kind of aligned on those, and again, I think the triple aim, sets high level guardrails for everyone, cost, quality, and patient sat, but you got to break that down into your organization's individual objectives and metrics, aligned with your organization's core competencies. Some organizations are better at certain specialties than others. So once you know your success criteria, then you get into the landscape of evaluation, right? And you're
Mhm.
exactly right in your comment that the first thing you got to figure out is the state of your data, right? What's the necessary data that needs to be brought in? How accurate is your data? How what's the state of it in terms of um, how fresh is it? How much, how trusted is it in proper formats and things like that? Because you got to think about, how are you going to centralize things in order to be able to run analytics on it? Then once you do that, it's all right. Well, how do you want to then serve up those analytics, and to whom in your organization? And so, I think you start going through then the sort of build versus buy scenarios, right? Where do you want to buy certain point solutions? Do you want to buy certain tools? Do you want to have your IT stitch things together? Do you want to have do you want to hire a consulting SI vendor? And more, are there sort of more cohesive and simpler enterprise solutions out there that are available to you versus trying to stitch and build it all together yourself? So, I mean, we at MedeAnalytics like to think of ourselves as, an example of that sort of, maybe easy button solution for not all things. We're not the panacea of analytics, but a wide swath of use cases that your organization might be trying to solve for could be done, and then you get the effectively the EDW, the data orchestration, and the consumable analytics all in one solution. That kind of thing.
So how would the product that is there a product name that, or is it MedeAnalytics?
You
Is
know,
that
we just go by MedeAnalytics,
okay?
and then each individual product, has a name, and they reflect whatever sort of healthcare use case and healthcare processes those analytics are addressed to.
Makes sense. So if you're coming into a client with a, a number of aggregate sources all over the place, how does the product go about bringing those together? And would you say, is that the core differentiator of the product?
Um, the core differentiator of the product is that it's the all-in-one solution. The
Gotcha.
fact that it's, we can orchestrate the data and bring it all in for you, normalize it, serve it up for you, and serve it up in a modern way with, cool visualization and, predictive machine learning models and algorithms, and then with the right healthcare context. So the core differentiator is the all-in-one. And what you're describing, that scenario of clients got a bunch of different data, a bunch of different data and a bunch of different systems and sources, is absolutely something that, a challenge that we're addressing on a daily basis. And we do it sort of two ways. If the company, if the organization that we're working with, if they've got a good handle on their data and they've got resources, then we just tell them, hey, here's our data spec. If you can get us the data in this spec, then literally the product lights up in a matter of days, because once you've put it in our spec, it's a matter of just activating the instance, on our cloud-based infrastructure and our platform, which is software as a service. That's a rapid thing in today's day and age. If you can't get us the data, then then that's the long pole in the tent on any implementation. And so, sometimes our clients say, hey, we'll take on, orchestrating all of this data and organizing it and getting it into your spec, but it's going to take us 90 days. And in certain cases we go, okay, that's fine. And then other clients, what we have a partnership, with a company called XDS, and it effectively is tooling where and consulting where we go into the client's source systems on their behalf, and we extract the data, we cleanse the data, we get it into the formats of our products, such that then the implementation can go on. And so we offer that as an optional service to try to help accelerate things and ease the burden for clients around this challenge.
Makes sense. So, staying on the data topic, one of the things I find interesting is that the types of data is evolving so rapidly. You think about IoT or some of the newer forms of collecting data. It's one, the scale goes up quite significantly, and the type of data changes, where it's stream versus a single point in time. How do you recommend companies think about that, or how does MedeAnalytics think about that? Is it just another data source that you have to consider, and it's kind of run of the mill versus compared to some of the existing data sources, or is it something that you truly have to look at completely differently?
I mean, it's certainly something that we put a lot of focus and a lot of investment from an R&D perspective into. Um, because there is an explosion of um, digitized devices. There is an explosion, obviously, due to everyone's running on EMR systems that are expanding into new and new data sources. There are new and emerging healthcare trends like social determinants of health that bring in a whole bunch of new kinds of data to be evaluated and for analytics and consumed. So, and listen, unstructured data is still really a challenge, right? Those, clinical notes and the conversion of unstructured data into more structured formats such that analytics can be run on top of it. Um, so I don't think that challenge is going away. And I do think the trends that we're really looking at in terms of new data orchestration areas are certainly Internet of Things, right? So IoT, social determinants of health brings in some very interesting new data sources from whether it be government agencies and census bureau data or food desert data or geospatial or transportation data, so all sorts, an explosion of new data sources to be brought in. Behavioral health, right, and mental health, that being factored in terms of healthcare analytics, are new data sources to be brought in, and again, a lot of unstructured data in those fields as well. Um, so look, there's a lot. So we put a lot of focus on those sorts of new data sources emerging, and then once you got it in, another then other areas that we're really looking at, and expanding on are like data science and machine learning. With this much data that's in healthcare, we can't possibly expect humans to put eyeballs to things and identify all the problems and anomalies that need to be addressed. So having machine learning algorithms and models that surface the issues, for a knowledge worker to action upon, that's going to be hugely important to analytics in healthcare going forward. So, we're putting a lot of focus on that as well.
Yeah, as you play that back, it gets me really excited about the future because when you think about the existing data from the past, it's single point in time, and it's you mentioned social determinants of health, which has been a big interest of mine recently. And the thing I realize is you can't from the data that's existing, it's hard to infer and get to the root cause of the problem, whether that's transportation, lack of food, whatever. You can't really see that just at face value. You almost have to run analytics or dive deeper to get to that root cause. And then when you think about putting machine learning or some high powered compute on top of that, that's when you can really start to uncover completely new frontiers in terms of data and analytics, right?
Yep, yep, yeah, we're really excited about the possibilities long term. And I think that will evolve as more and more evidence-based studies evolve that demonstrate clear linkages, and at a detailed level, and clear sort of interventions and cohesive care plans that link both mental health with the actual physical health of an individual, so that you can action against it. So as that sort of field of science continues to evolve and mature, it's going to open up a lot of opportunities for algorithms and machine learning and things like that to kind of identify opportunities and raise awareness so that actions can be taken that improve people's health.
Yeah, the tricky part, it's humans are the end result, or humans are what ultimately feel the action of whatever's taken from the analytics. So you mentioned it before, the quality aspects and just making sure the data is completely correct and that the insights you're surfacing are valid and actionable. Talk about that a little bit. How do you go about making sure you remain in balance and not moving too fast and creating undue risk?
Oh boy, yeah. So that's a huge topic in the analytics field right now, right? Um, in particular, in the clinical settings, and who do you trust, your doc or the algorithm, right? Like those sorts of debates are, starting to emerge, and boy, those are super tricky to navigate. So, right now, MedeAnalytics. We're a little bit on the sidelines as on that potential debate. So uh, we're a software company. We serve up analytics based upon algorithms, and but the sort of decisioning against those analytics is in the hands of our customers. Now, what we have done, let me continue with that first thing. It's in the hands of our customers. So like clinical decisions that they would make are based upon their interpretation as clinicians. Financial decisions that they make, operational decisions are based upon their financial experts and their operations experts making those decisions, whether it be in the health system or in the payer or in whatever organization is using our analytics.
Yeah, and Scott, real
However,
quick to jump in there, I think something that should be called out for in terms of analytics, you think about those people, they have the domain expertise, and that's really what they hopefully love to do is make decisions around whatever domain expertise they have. I'm guessing prior to some of these analytics tools come to the forefront, they spent a whole bunch of their time just entering data or aggregating data. So I think that's the best in the couple instances I've dipped my toes into analytics projects, seeing the end users and that they're able to focus on what they do best rather than all the admin tasks that goes into collecting the data and putting it together.
oh, for sure. I mean, absolutely. Like they historically would request a report or something like that from their IT and have to wait 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever for it to turn around, and they've probably moved on by the time they would get that report. In today's analytics tools, like what we have, you can do it more instantaneously. So that certainly empowers them. But what I will say is there's still a lot of the analytics tools today are still really black box. Like you don't know what was in that model. You don't know what was in that algorithm. You don't know what the inputs were that went into the model and what was the logic that it went through that spit out the output, right? And so if you are an analytics consumer in a healthcare organization today and you're making serious decisions like what you were just talking about, that's a real dilemma. And so, what we have done over the last 3 years in particular is we built out our platform. We call it MediCreate, and we have just really opened it up so that it is fully transparent. Like you can drill in and see the SQL that is used in certain algorithms and analytics queries. You can drill into the R or Python code that is used in the machine learning model that is delivering a prediction or a forecast that your user is consuming. So what we have focused on is, as a software company, is making it as transparent as possible such that our constituents can have faith and trust in, how the analytics got served up to them because they can drill in and validate it all the way through.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. I what were we talking about before? Sorry, I interrupted you and now I can't remember.
Before we talked about, how we see data evolving in healthcare.
Oh, right.
I
Right,
think
right,
that's
right.
where we last left. And then you were talking about, sort of and what I was just last answering, the concern around how do you make sure that the analytics that you're serving up are trusted, right? and evidence based and those kinds of things. And so
Right,
that's
right, right,
that's
right.
what I was.
Okay. So I think we've covered a bunch of what I had planned. Is there anything else from MedeAnalytics that we didn't highlight that you want to call out, or just anything about analytics in general that's noteworthy?
I don't think so. I think we've covered sort of a wide gamut of things. In terms of what are the challenges that are out there and what are the opportunities. So, I mean, we're really excited about where the market is heading, about the role that we can play in making healthcare more effective and more sustainable, financially and otherwise. So, we're really excited, and I hope I hope your listeners find this to be an interesting topic. So thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Well, Scott, one more question. So I want to throw a, because I think your perspective is so interesting, because analytics, it's so flexible and everyone can use it slightly differently. And you have such a broad breadth of customers. I'm wondering if you could, an open ended question, you could take this however you want or wherever you want. If you could snap your fingers and solve one industry problem, what would it be and why?
Hmm. Man, I would have, I don't know that I can think of like the one, but I know price transparency would have to be in at least my top three. I just think healthcare pricing is just too complicated, and too black box right now, here in the US. You just have a tremendous amount of variance around the price of care, around the nation. Um, and I just think about every other sort of consumer experience that I have, or any of us have, when it comes to interacting with the U.S. economy. I mean, there's a consumer and a seller, right? There's a buyer and a seller, and you know what the price is, and you pay it, and you should get the outcome that you want. And you as an individual then research it and make informed buying decisions, and it's incumbent on you. And while there is a tremendous amount of complexity in healthcare, and you want advisement from your providers and care from your providers and things, it just feels like, the price transparency issue is a real problem. But when you say, like, snap your fingers, that's why it came to mind, is that it's also a Gordian knot right now. I mean, there's
Yep.
just years and years of contracts and between individual providers and payers, and I
There's
don't.
not really a clear path to a solution.
You got it. So it's one
Yeah.
of those. Boy, it'd be nice to snap our fingers and
Yeah,
have that
it's always
solved.
funny when I talk to folks on the podcast how you forget that everyone in healthcare is a consumer, because we're all going to use healthcare at some point. So I think that's a great answer that we all can empathize and relate with.
Right, right.
Well, thanks so much for the time and sharing your perspective. It's in analytics in particular is interesting because it's something that's brand new and never been done in the way it's being done at this present moment. And as we touched on, it's got a whole lot of evolution to come in the future. So definitely something I'm excited about. And I'm thanks so much for sharing your perspective and diving deep with us.
Well, thanks as well, and best wishes for continued success with the podcast, and thanks a lot for your time.
All right. Scott, if anyone wants to reach out to you or MedeAnalytics, what's the best way?
Um, we'll
Check out the
certainly,
website.
probably right off our website. There's a
Okay.
contact us right off our website, and depending upon the nature of the inquiry, it'll get routed to the appropriate people. So that'd be the best way.
All righty. Sounds good. We'll end on that and be back with another guest soon. Thanks
All
everyone
right.
for listening. Bye.